Before I rediscovered my faith in my late teens, I was starting to live my life by the principles of natural horsemanship. Now, these were primarily focused on human-horse relationships, but much of the meaning behind them can be applied to everyday life. I like to think that I still live by those principles, but one that I still struggle with, and yet preach as much as I can, is principle number 2. Never make or teach assumptions. And these ones I can remember, but this, unsurprisingly, is often forgotten by most people today, in all walks of life. It may feel like it goes completely unnoticed as well, but clearly I'm not the only one to have noticed this, since a YouTube channel has been on my radar for a while that seems to be aimed at just this problem of sorting out the old lies. Have you into the drill by now? Let us see if we walk the same road. Unlearn the Lies has been on YouTube for about 7 years and is a very biblically centered channel run by a man named Lex. He hasn't declared any connection to a particular denomination of the church, as far as I'm aware, but it sounds like he's disenfranchised from the church as a whole and favours direct teachings from the Bible. And in fact, he set up his own church, I believe it was in Oklahoma. So, heavily biblical American preacher. This is almost a stereotype of some people going down the path. But in his promo video for his channel, he says the church has learned a large number of lies over the years, using the example of broken telephones, or as we would call in Britain, Chinese whispers, to demonstrate the point. Not too dissimilar to my own channel, it seems. Except his teachings say the Bible should be allowed to interpret itself, and we should learn from that. There's only a good base for understanding, since constant comparisons between the Old and New Testaments are made in the pages of the book itself. But it does rely on inerrancy and only learning from that book. Does this method help us find a way to see God's glory for what it is and serve Him in the best way possible? Well, there's only really one way to find out. Let's dive into his videos and see what they can provide in terms of lessons. First topic that seems appropriate for this is that of the resurrection. This is said by Paul to be an elemental principle of the Christian faith. Now, the resurrection of Christ is a foundation stone of the whole idea of Christendom, so not even missed by some denouncers. But it seems there's more to the resurrection than just Jesus popping up a few days later. It's worth noting that Lex uses the Hebrew name Yeshua rather than the common Greek term Jesus. Since this is an end of the world doctrine sort of thing, I'm not familiar with the idea of the dead rising at the end of days. But I'm not sure personally it means literally the body or the spirit being brought back to face judgment. Due to the literalness of his teaching, it does imply the zombie apocalypse is merely a subconscious expression of this, since the body is walking again with all its needs, but none of the minds of men. With all that confusion, there's definitely more to this than can be understood in just plain terms. Now, next, a couple of videos on this, on the importance of the resurrection is, well, how important it is to the gospel, without giving us any further understanding of what it exactly entails. Only mentioning bits in separate videos, completely out of context. So I'm going to do a video myself to help clarify the topic. This is where overthinking things without complete understanding can be detrimental to one's faith and conviction. But it's worthwhile diving into, because that's sort of what I do. Ultimately, I think it's just the basics getting, well, too ingrained. As a result, he doesn't make a good show of explaining it. There's definitely far more to this than just dead rising up. So, those of you who watch The Walking Dead, I don't think there's any need to buy a crossbow or a samurai sword anytime soon. By the way, I have a feeling a falchion might be a bit better than a samurai. My personal view. Like some Seventh-day Adventists, well, all Seventh-day Adventists, Lex brings up the Sabbath and repeatedly mentions the verses that harken back to the creation, where God created the earth in 6 days and rests on the 7th. This is true, and whilst, as an Anglican man, I worship on a Sunday out of tradition, I don't think it's breaking the Sabbath. This is for 2 reasons. I have done a whole video on this, so I won't go into too much detail here, but I'll try covering a few. The first reason is practicality. Many of us have jobs to do throughout the week, and this can take a toll on us. I've worked some very hard jobs in my time, and in this day and age, working more means hopefully getting more money. However, this can cause us to burn out. Working without rest can be detrimental to our health. Now, whilst I'm not of the belief that God made the earth in 7 literal Earth days, I do believe God knew our limits and gave us a day of rest to allow for the optimum time for work and yet help us to rest and refresh ourselves. The Bible does emphasize that we work 6 days and rest on the 7th. So the Sabbath isn't optional to have at any point. It's not necessarily the same day for all. It's worthwhile noting that whilst Jesus didn't break the Sabbath, he got stuff done on the Sabbath that was needed. For example, healing someone because they needed healing before debating with the Pharisees, or making sure disciples got fed on the Sabbath. Secondly, for the priests. Let's mention the priests in Ezekiel were profaning the name of God and the Sabbath without giving any clarification. I did a brief look at the chapter in question, which was Ezekiel 22. and didn't have much more information. So I'm inclined to think it's akin to the Pharisees making the Sabbath day service more about pomp and ceremony than about resting and learning, which results in more work and ritual on that day. I know that Sunday is the Lord's Day and not the Sabbath, but I don't think it should be seen as a swap for the Sabbath, but merely presented as such so people can attend church on a day when more work based ceremonies can be performed for the glory of God without profaning the Sabbath. Having spent my adolescent years as an altar server and grew up in a church choir family, I know that Sundays aren't restful days, and people of the church are more active on that day than most other days of the week. Seriously, I've done choir holidays, and the moment I was able to actually do some work there, it lost all holiday feel. We were working. We weren't getting paid, we were just doing stuff. And often, at the end of the day, we just completely rash out because we were just worn out. It was day in, day out. In short, the Sabbath, the day of rest, hasn't changed, but the day of celebration has. Since gathering for prayer, worship, and learning can be done at any time of the week and has been done, it makes the most sense. Lex isn't wrong. The Catholic Church was wrong to claim the Lord's Day is now the Sabbath, but lampooning the Catholic Church is, well, old hat. The Anglicans have been doing it for hundreds of years, so there's no point going ahead with it now. This is an issue that, strictly speaking, I shouldn't get involved in, since it's mostly political in nature. Furthermore, it's based in the USA, and since I live in Scotland, that is well outside my worries, and therefore I really shouldn't worry about it. However, it raises questions about gender identity and religious freedoms that I'm not sure apply. Now, the term gender, in the broad sense, is used to encompass both the biology and the identity. To make things easier, I'm going to refer to biological gender as sex, and use gender to refer to one's identity, just because it makes it a bit easier. Sex, that's your organs. Gender, that's who you are. I said in a video about coming out that Paul's letter to the Hebrews outlines something many scholars have raised over the years, that man's nature is threefold: body, soul, and spirit. That's important to remember, since we don't know what God was looking at when he made the first man and woman. Was he looking at their bodies? Was he looking at their soul? Was he looking at their spirit? He could have been looking at something completely different. He could have been looking at how we interact, how our interactions in the family make our genders important, whilst our biology just happens to be something to bear in mind. Yes, there is a great deal of evidence in nature that there are technically only two sexes, and certainly gametes do need to be of two different genders. But just because two natural beings typically need to exchange male and female gametes doesn't mean that they have to be of separate genders themselves, of separate sexes. There's a phenomenon in biology known as hermaphroditism. A hermaphrodite is a person or animal having both male and female sex organs or other sexual characteristics. This could be an anomaly in some cases, but in quite a few cases with some organisms, like snails and slugs, for example, this is a natural condition. This occurs in many animals and has occurred occasionally in humans, and can exist in both a biological level or a genetic one. Anyone that's seen some medical dramas such as House or Chicago Med knows there is such a thing as male pseudo-hermaphroditism, where essentially the DNA is male. They had the organs of a male, but the testicles never dropped. So the outside appearance is purely female, but everything else, there's no ovaries. That person is never going to have children. Never. So whilst 90% of the time we can identify someone positively as a certain gender, there is still a gap that allows for error in genetics alone. This is before we get into personality traits, which can lead to being more feminine or masculine than their sex would normally be inclined towards. Now, there's nothing in the Bible or in God's world that supports the simple link to gender identity. And whilst I intend to go the traditional route with any children I have and give them names and clothes according to their sex so we identify them at birth, I'll let God decide what their identity is. The fact that Lex goes into a rant about Satan trying to confuse things doesn't improve his name in my eyes. That being said, Lex does raise some valid concerns about potential risks and lawsuits that the Equality Act could potentially bring. Whilst I don't think an open church should worry about such things, the risk to women and children is unmistakable and should be taken very seriously. To prevent people from exploiting the law and preying on those who deserve their right to privacy. If you want to put a personal opinion on this, if you're transgender or gender fluid, use the bathroom, locker room, or shower that is purpose designed for people of your biology. Simple. If you say you're a woman, you dress like a woman, you feel like a woman, but you have male gametangia, you're going to the gents, madam. That's the way it goes. It's similar to providing the disabled with facilities to cater for their needs. A lift, a larger space to park a wheelchair, or allowances for service animals. My sister-in-law, for example, she needs to use crutches to get around a fair bit, and so she needs the special seats on a bus. That's her need. She has the devices that will help her get around, but ultimately, she's still female. She'll still use the bathroom. Whether she uses the disabled bathroom or not, I don't know. That's not my place to comment. But basically, you have the parts that are being catered for in a certain bathroom. Please use that bathroom. It's a bit like. Let me put it another way. Let me see. I don't know. You say you have a load of brand new toilets that are functional, ready for use by everyone, and then everyone goes to use the old composting toilets because they are the authentic ones. Authenticity is all very well, but when you're trying to get more people through the loos, go for the modern ones we have built at the back. It all works quickly, so just use them. You may use the facilities provided in whatever way you prefer. For example, if you are male to female trans, haven't yet transitioned, and to the parts, still use the male bathrooms, but you don't necessarily need to use the urinals. There are stalls in the male bathroom. Use those. That is perfectly fine, if that's what you feel more comfortable with. Next best option, in my opinion, is unisex cubicles. But that will involve different sort of infrastructure, so, like I said, it's the next best solution. Ultimately, Lex has some good points, so I can't fault him there. But going on a whole religious rant about it just takes away the fear and sting of it all, really. Lex has done a few videos on the different festivals of the year and given his stout biblical view on them. Halloween, he says we should have nothing to do with it due to the association with the dead. Now, there are a couple of issues I have with that. First, now I don't celebrate Halloween personally. It's not my thing. Never has been, to be honest. I never celebrated, never went trick or treating ever. But whilst associating with the dead, and God isn't the God of the dead, is perfectly reasonable. Here's the thing, though. There are more than a few occasions in the Bible where associating with death is actually a noted thing and a positive thing. I mean, where were Moses and Elijah when Christ went up to meet them on the mountain? I don't know which mountain it was off the top of my head. But they were spirits, some sort. That's something I should do a video about. I know he did a video on it. And also, Christ went to a funeral, about the funeral of Lazarus. But it wasn't until the people don't worry, you shouldn't be worrying about death. He was there to comfort people. I would also ask these questions. Why are we following a book written, in no second terms, by long dead people? Should the God-given views of our elders past be of no further use to us, since they won't rise again until the last day? I think the problem is he's confusing veneration with communication, which, since they don't have any connection whatsoever, it's hard to understand how this is. According to Strong's Hebrew, there are 168 different words of worship, well, useful worship, which is only taken up in one translation to mean venerate, which, and for most of them, it means bow down or be reverent to, and is primarily focused on God. The term connect with necromancy, or to inquire of spirits, is darash, or dorash, and is easy to misread for a non-native speaker of Hebrew, and is only nine more words linked to necromancy that crop up in the entire book. Surely we are to love our parents even after they are dead. It's one of the laws written by those gone before us. If someone told me to forget my grandmother, to tell my grandpa to remarry immediately after losing his wife for 50 years, or tell my partner to get over the death of her father, they will be punched very hard in the face. I know it's not biblical either, but quite frankly, if you're going to be that unloving, you deserve it. Remembering the people in history is just as important as the events, because without the people, the events are meaningless. And remembering our loved ones is something we should do. So we should be thankful for what they have done in God's name. Knowing the law is different to understanding the law. Knowing why certain things are abominations is more important than just knowing what those abominations are. So now, what about Christmas? Well, I've made comments on his videos about it, and I did a whole video on the subject, so I won't go into a lot of detail. And I'll leave a link in the video in the description below. You can watch the video yourself. I will say this, however, since he does quote the Protestant preacher Charles Spurgeon. He says that he was the most beloved, most venerated Protestant preacher. At the time he was preaching, which was in the 1800s, I believe, the rivalry between the Anglican and Catholic churches was still extremely prominent. It was to the point where families disowned children who married the other faith. Saying they abhor any Mass doesn't necessarily refer to the Mass of Christ at the time of the year in question, since Mass is a Catholic thing. The Bible does say listening to someone who is filled with anger, with rage, is an abomination. And with the two churches being so heated against one another at that time, even I, as a man of the Protestant Church, as an Anglican, don't think that Spurgeon's word should be taken as gospel. You may think that grieves me. Really, I don't care. Just because a member of my church doesn't mean he knows everything either. We're all learning. Interestingly, he seems to denounce all festivals of the year, so the Passover. However, why can't Passover be linked to the resurrection of Christ by sharing Holy Communion and holding a large family meal? This is linked to enough pagan cultures, or could be linked to enough pagan cultures that it falls out of favour in their eyes, but it's worthwhile noting that those of us who consider ourselves Christian owe the Catholic Church to us being Christian. Otherwise, we could be part of any other faith, including Islam or, heaven forbid, neo-pagan. This is linked with the history of ideas, so I may need to do a video on this as well at some point. But I think this shows the problem with drawing knowledge from a single source without viewing it through the lens of life. Here, interesting enough, Lex openly declares that personal experiences matter little compared with the Bible. I will clarify, however, this was in his video on near-death experiences, so I don't want it to get blown out of proportion. So I'm going to delve into this quickly, because what he says about the near-death experience people seem to be linked only to those who shout about their near-death experiences. I find it rather interesting that Isaiah wrote about his vision, regardless of how small he felt. He wrote about it, and it got put in the Bible, which is one of the most widely publicised stories ever. Now, I have never experienced a near-death experience. I don't intend to either. I don't intend to chat about it. I'm not really a big believer in those who claim to have near-death experiences. However, let me tell you a tale about a man who had something similar happen to him. He was my boss/landlord when I worked in Western Australia. He was in hospital for one of his many ailments. Lord preserve him for it. Although he knows what it was this time. Could have been one of his heart attacks. Could have been when he had a stroke. Could have been. He's not a well man. Let's put it that way. But he's still going, as far as I'm aware. But one night he was in hospital. I don't know if he was having surgery or anything, but anyway, he had a weird dream. He was talking to his father-in-law and his own father, both of whom were long dead. Though I don't remember if he told me much of the conversation, but he did remember them saying that they weren't ready for him. The next morning he woke up and told his wife about it. She just sitting next to him, just they were chatting away. And then soon the doctor came in and told them both that he'd actually died on the table and they had to bring him back. And that's all really. It wasn't a boastful tale. He didn't say it to me as one of many people packed in a hall of followers or even at the local church. No, this is a private conversation we had. I don't remember exactly where it was. It was either in his car, we were off doing a job, and the fields we were doing another job, or just sitting in his shed having a little chat. He also told me that he had been raised in a Catholic school, which had given him a rather tedious sense of how God is worshipped, which, in my opinion, sort of dented his belief, or at least made him less inclined to visit church. And this didn't change that, to be fair. Like I said, I don't believe in near-death experiences. But when Mr. Stremple tells us something like that, I would trust him to tell only the truth. Seriously, if anyone was on trial, I would trust him to give perfect evidence. This is where I find it a bit interesting, because Lex claims that our personal experiences are second fiddle to what the Bible has to say. And yet he, on a couple of occasions, has God to thank for things in his life. I'm not going to delve into it. That's his story. That's himself. But those of you that watch his channel, I'll leave a link to in the description. You might see what I'm referring to. But I always raise the question, if God only has feats of work in the Bible, and we have to rely on those feats for references, then he doesn't really do much in the world right now, does he? Because we accept the big stuff. Also, interestingly enough, this is a weird tangent, and I should have mentioned it earlier, but when Jesus was at the tomb, talking to the mother of Lazarus, and saying the resurrection was to... Oh, she was saying that he would be resurrected in the days. Lex mentions in this section that Gwen Clee didn't know that Jesus was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. That was all the point. whilst I hate using this term when it comes to Christ, a magician never reveals his secrets. If you don't explain a miracle, it's far more miraculous. Go on, there can be far more detailed things that you keep the miracle going, but you're going to say, yeah, you could more than that, or I could raise him from the dead. He's a messiah, not dynamo magician impossible. At the end of the day, he's that little thing just didn't really emphasize what Christ was about. Yes, he was going to do something quite spectacular, but it was pretty darn obvious he wasn't going to. That no one knew what was going to happen at that point. Because, well, then why would they consider it a miracle? He says he's going to do something, then he does it. That's not a miracle. That is him just lesson aim, show the lesson, it's done. Sorry about that ramble. But let me just start to sum up, because when I went into this project, I was expecting to be annoyed and frustrated at every turn at this man's blind assumptions and flat-out refusal to understand anything outside the biblical narrative. I saw more than a few of them, and it just didn't make any sense to me way back then. But as I started playing through, I was pleasantly surprised at some of the things that said in his videos, and I'm find oddly gratifying that his video style isn't too dissimilar to mine. Unfortunately, though, my initial thoughts turned out to be more or less correct. In his delving into the Word of God, he appears to have not only boxed in his own perspective on the world, but put God in that box, which only makes it smaller, but seems to go against the very intent of his channel. Now, despite all that derogatory stuff, I have a lot of respect for him as a man of God and as a biblical scholar. Yes, he has some views I don't agree with. Raises things I've covered in the past, in my videos, and given me ideas for future videos. I am disappointed that my original assumption turned out to be mostly true, but I sense kinship with this man. He faces his own batch of negativity and put-downs. I'm glad I saw that video before drafting this conclusion. Planting his own church is quite a step, and being willing to have a dialogue with those who criticise his teachings. These are all admirable things, and show dedication to his work, even if some of his methods would wander somewhat from the path I would take. I will say this. One thing I call out as a worry is his desire to be among the numbers of heaven. Be among the, what was it, the one gross thousand, something like that? I don't remember. Either way, this makes me wonder what would happen if he didn't join them. What would his reaction be? Now, for my part, I focus more on what I do for others, because it is good. Because I'm doing good for others. Not because it gives me brownie points, but because it is objectively good. But if what I think is good and right turns out to be wrong, and I end up in the fires of Gehenna, I'll hold up my hands and say that's where I'll go. I will face my punishment. Not gladly or in anger, but accepting I was wrong. I may end up scrolling a little bit and certainly may regret it a lot more when I'm actually in there, but really, if I'm wrong, I'm willing to accept it. My job isn't to be right. My job isn't to overrule Lex. My job is to clarify and smooth the ground. So, Lex, if you're watching, and I hope you are, I hope you understand that this is from a man who may walk a slightly different path, but hopes that his path leads in the right direction as well. This is normally the point of these videos. I would throw down the gauntlet and challenge you to respond in whatever way you like. But since you faced harsher words than my own, I'm going to be diplomatic, well, it's more diplomatic than I am for others, and invite you for a dialogue. In warrior terms, a friendly and civil sparring match. You've asked to do to be civil. I'm willing to open that chessboard for you, as it were. If you're interested, message me on the back end of my channel, and we'll see what we can do. Sometimes we can be different in person to what we may appear on video. So I look forward to future discussion. And for those of you who've made it this far in this video, thanks for watching, stay safe, and God be with you.